All right, welcome, friends. I'm Rabbi Micah Streifer. I'm the director of La Asok, and I'm excited and thrilled to welcome Rabbi Jeffrey Kurtz-Lendner today to explore with us the topic of walking through the shadow. Why do good people suffer? Rabbi Kurtz-Lendner is serving currently as the rabbi um, of Bethel Congregation in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And I'll just mention that Bethel Congregation is a co-sponsor together with La Asok of this program. And I know several of you are members of Bethel Congregation, and we're excited to welcome you into this community as we form a learning community together. He previously served in several other communities, mostly across the South, including, strangely, places where I've lived too, including Mississippi and Louisiana. You don't find a lot of Jews that have also lived in Mississippi and Louisiana, but here we are, Rabbi Kurtz-Lendner. He also serves as a volunteer chaplain for the Harrisonburg Police Department, as well as teaching on Zoom and in person and leading his congregation. So I'm going to invite us to join together in the blessing for study. If you feel you can unmute yourself now so that we can hear one another say this blessing together, and then we'll jump into our hour of study together. Please join me. Baruch
Baruch
atah
Adonai
Eloheinu
Eloheinu
melech
melech
asher
asher
kidshanu
kidshanu
b'mitzvotav
b'mitzvotav
tzivanu
tzivanu
la'asot
la'asot
Torah.
divrei Torah.
Love that cacophony of voices. Blessed is the Eternal, whose mitzvot, whose commandments bring sacredness or holiness to our lives, and who commands us to immerse, to engage in words of Torah. So if I could ask people to please remute yourselves at the moment, and I'll turn things now over to Rabbi Jeffrey Kurtz-Lendner.
Thank you. Yeah, I actually knew Micah's father before I knew Micah. When I was serving in Louisiana, his father was he, which medical school was he teacher at? He was a teacher at
As Bob just said, it was
Tulane. He
at
was too.
Tulane. That's
Yeah,
right.
I wasn't sure if it was Tulane or LSU medical school. I thought it was Tulane, but he was our community moil in the Reformed community. So I met him before I got to know Micah. Micah, you're from Baton Rouge, right?
I mean, it's a little more complicated than that, but we'll say
All
South
right.
Louisiana among other
All right.
places.
Yeah. Yeah. My wife is from South Louisiana too, from Nowheresville, South Louisiana. And I was probably the only rabbi ever to have been married in the temple in this town. And I think I was the last wedding that there are no Jews left in that town now. As typical around the South. So, um, so today we're going to look at, so the class we call Why Do Good People Suffer? And the concept in philosophical terms, the word is called theodicy. Theodicy, theo meaning God, and disi meaning justice. Theodicy, justifying God. It's a question that goes back thousands of years. And really, when the question is, why do bad things happen in the world? In my opinion, there are officially three three possible answers. Well, there's a fourth. The fourth is there is no God, but then it's no longer a question of a theological question. But if God, assuming God exists, there are only three possible answers. In my contention, there's really only two. The first possible answer is that God is all good, but God is not all powerful. That's one possibility. Second possibility is God is all powerful, but not all good. That's the second possibility. The third possibility is that we just don't understand. God is both all good and all powerful, and we don't understand. In my opinion, that's a cop-out. I believe that when you say we don't understand, which is the traditional answer, I think what it's saying is God really is all good, but not all powerful, because it'd be very challenging for most of us to believe in a God that is all good. I mean, that is all powerful, but not all good. Be very difficult for us to believe in a God that is capricious or sometimes malicious. That'd be challenging. Um, so like this, for example, if you are walking down the street and you see someone hurt in the street and you have your cell phone with you and you look at the person and you notice them and you turn away and keep walking, we would think that that's not a good thing. The only thing you would have to do is just dial 911. Don't have to give your name or anything. Just say someone's here on the street, here's the address, send someone. And you choose not to do that. And if you don't do that, we're going to assume morally you are not a good person. You could do something and you do nothing. Well, if God is all powerful, then there is no circumstance in which God can not do something. And if God could do even something, his power, if that powerful and can do anything and chooses not to, then God is not all good, and we would have a very difficult time with that. Okay, so the assumption that God is both all good and all powerful is a conflict for the question of theodicy. And that's what theodicy attempts to address. I want to start with some biblical texts, and some of you may have had a chance to look at this. So what I'm going to do is, in case you haven't, I've got it here, and I'm going to display this so you can all see it as we look at it. Here we go. And you can see here when God creates the earth. And God said, let us make man, and I'm using a traditional text. This is just the traditional text of the right from the Torah. God says, let us make man in our image after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all creeping things that creep on earth. And God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it. Will the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all living things that creep on the earth. God said, see, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth, and every tree that is seed-bearing fruit, they shall be yours for food. And to all the animals on the land, to all the birds of the sky, and to everything that creeps on earth, in which there is breath of life, I give all the green plants for food. And it was so. And God saw that all he had made and found it very good. Tov Ma'od. So at the end of creation, the end of the sixth day, every day, at the end of each day, when God created something, the response, it concluded, God saw that it was good. Each day God saw that it was good. And after creating humanity, God saw that it was very good. The consistent theme after each step of creation is that it was good, which is in a very critical theological assertion of the Bible, because in other ancient traditions, goodness was not the absolute defining purpose of creation. In some traditions, the gods created the world by accident and humanity by accident. In some stories, the gods created humanity to be slaves to the gods. So they did it for their own benefit. The Bible declares that God does it for good. And it's repeated 6 times after the creation of each day. God saw that it was good. At the end of the 6th day, God saw that it was very good. So that is a very important theological premise of the definition of God. God is good. All right. Yeah. So the difference between good and very good was the creation of evil. Well, no, creation was not created the sixth day. There was no evil created yet. There was no evil. Evil is developed by humanity. Okay. Evil does not happen in the Bible until chapter 2. Um, if you say that God created evil, that is going back to the idea that God is omnipotent. Okay. Um, the Bible does not necessarily think that God is omnipotent. That's a later construct. We therefore read the Bible backwards. Later, for example, omnipotent and omniscient, those are developments in the Greek tradition. Those are from the Greek philosophical concepts of omnipotence and omniscience, which are post-biblical. They are not from the Bible. Later, the Talmudic rabbis read those back into the Bible. For example, we know that in chapter 2, when Adam and Eve, or after the creation, when Adam and Eve eat the apple and then they're wandering through the desert, God says, "Where are you?" We know that that is a rhetorical question because God knows everything. Except in the Bible, it doesn't seem to be a rhetorical question. But the God really doesn't seem to know where they are. Assuming that the question is rhetorical is reading backwards because the Bible itself does not necessarily portray God as being omnipotent and omniscient. So those are some important factors to take a look at. But the foundation is that God is all good. Okay? All right. Um, if you if the text should have all been sent to you. If you want to peruse some of those texts, you'll see more examples of how God was all good and then humanity brought evil into the world. And those texts reflect that. It shows the repetition of goodness, and anytime there is evil, it's brought about by humanity, especially when it gets out of control in chapter 6. And I will share this, chapter 6, where we see it completely out of control. When men began to increase on earth and daughters were born to them, the divine beings saw how beautiful the daughters of the men were and took wives from among those that pleased them. The Eternal said, "My breath shall not abide in man forever, since he too is flesh. Let the days allowed him to be 120 years. It was then and later too that the Nephilim appeared on earth, when the divine beings cohabited with the daughters of men and bore them offspring. They were the heroes of old, the men of renown. The Eternal saw how great was man's wickedness on earth, and how every plan devised by his mind was nothing but evil in all time. And the Eternal regretted that he had made man on earth, and his heart was sad. And the Eternal said, I will blot out from the earth the men whom I've created, men with beasts, creeping things, and birds of the sky, for I regret that I made them." So we saw that in Genesis chapter 1, everything God made was good, and the introduction of humanity
Work around her.
leads to human beings repeatedly bring evil into the world. First, Adam and Eve disobey God, then Cain kills Abel, murder, and then by the time you get to Noah, humanity's out of control, so much so that God wants to start over and try again. All right. Let me see. So according to Genesis, why do people suffer? People suffer because human beings brought it about them. Eventually, we find before we even get to the story of Noah, we have the passages where it says that because of Adam and Eve's sin, human beings will suffer. Men will now have to work the land and sweat They no longer have the free food for the taking in the Garden of Eden, but now they have to work the land. If they don't work for the food, they don't get it. They're going to work themselves hard. Women will now be in pain during labor. And according to the Bible, all of that suffering was created because of the evil that Adam and Eve did. So far, the definition of evil comes because of humanity. And when humanity's evil gets completely out of control, God has no choice but to destroy them. God saves the only good people God can find, and that was Noah and Noah's family. Those are the only good people God could find. And they remained good throughout the time on the ark and remained good until they left the ark. And then the very first thing, uh, 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 um, Noah planted a vineyard, got drunk, and engaged in illicit behavior. So once again, we see that so far humanity is the source of evil. All right. If you want to get into some real idea when you really what happens when the Jewish people, when you as Israelites disobey God, well, you've got blessings and curses. So we're going to go look at some blessings and curses. We are going to look at Deuteronomy. Because you would not serve the eternal your God in joy and gladness over abundance of everything, you shall have to serve in hunger and thirst. You shall have to serve in hunger and thirst, naked and lacking everything. The enemies whom the eternal will let loose against you. He will put an iron yoke upon your neck until he has wiped you out. The eternal will bring a nation against you from afar, from the end of the earth, which will swoop down like an eagle, a nation whose language you don't understand, a ruthless nation that will devour the old, no regard, and the young, no mercy. It shall devour the offspring of your cattle and the produce of your land until you have been wiped out, leaving you nothing of new grain, wine, or oil, at the calving of your herds and the lambing of your flocks until it has brought you to ruin. It shall shut you up in all your towns throughout your land until every mighty towering wall in which your trust come down. And when you are shut up in all your towns throughout your land, that the eternal your God has assigned to you. Okay. When bad things happen, you deserve it. According to the Bible, bad things happen because people deserve it. That is the answer according to the Bible. And so, but if you if you look a little bit further on this, going to Deuteronomy, I want to share some more. If you get Now, if you obey the eternal your God to observe faithfully all his commandments, which I enjoin you upon this day, the eternal your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. All the blessings shall come upon you and take effect, if you will but heed the word of the eternal. Blessed you'll be in the city, blessed you'll be in the country, blessed shall be the issue of your womb, the produce of your soil, and the offspring of your cattle, the calving of your herd, and the lambing of your flock. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessing shall you be in your comings, and blessing shall you be in your goings. The eternal will put to rout before you the enemies who attack you. They will march out against you by a single road, but flee from you by many roads. The eternal will ordain blessings for you upon your barns and upon your undertaking. He will bless you in the land that the eternal your God is giving you. But just in case you missed the point, but if you do not obey the eternal your God to observe faithfully all the commandments and laws which I join you this day, all these curses shall come upon you and take effect. You shall be cursed in the city, you shall be cursed in the country. Cursed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Cursed shall be the issue of your womb, and the produce of your soil, the calving of the herd and the lambing of your flock. Cursed shall you be in your comings, and cursed shall be in your going. All right, all of this is the same text, just in the opposite. Although we find that going on a little bit further, the eternal will strike you with consumption, fever, and inflammation, with scorching heat, with drought, with blight and mildew. They shall hound you until you perish. The skies above your head shall be copper, and the earth under you iron. The Eternal will make the rain of your land dust. The sand shall drop on you from the sky until you are wiped out. Now, you're already wiped out, right? But that's still, it's not enough. You're already wiped out. But even so, the Eternal will then put you to rout before your enemies. I don't know what they're left. Since you've been wiped out, there's nothing left to put out, but God's going to do it anyway. My mother used to say, if you ever just cross the street, not carefully, and get hit by a car, I'm going to come find you and I'm going to kill you again. Well, this is what's happening here. You're already wiped out and God's keep going. You know, it's just like, okay, it's bad because you deserve it. The Bible is very clear. God is all good. People do bad things. Bad things happen to people because they deserve it. Okay, that makes it completely clear. All right. All right, but let's look at examples of when this exactly happened. So all of this is hypothetical for now. Now let's get into some biblical stories where this happens. And here's where it gets very interesting. The first part, Ammon. This is in chapter 2 Kings. In Kings talks about all the kings who were bad and the few who were good. 100% of the kings after the split between Israel and Judah, 100% of the northern kings were bad. About 75% of the southern kings were bad. Here we are, one of the southern kings, Ammon, was 22 years old when he became king, and he reigned 2 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Meshulemet, daughter of Haruz of Yotba. He did what was displeasing to the Eternal, as his father Manasseh had done. He walked in all the ways of his father, worshiping the fetishes with his father had worshipped and bowing down to them. He forsook the Eternal, the God of his fathers, did not follow the way of the Eternal. Ammon's courtiers conspired against him, and they killed the king in his palace. But the people of the land put to death all who had conspired against King Ammon, and the people of the land made his son Josiah king in his stead. So it is absolutely clear why King Ammon was killed. Okay? He was killed because he disobeyed God, and therefore he had to die. All right? So let's go on, because this is the part that gets, that becomes a question to think about. Following, we read just that they appointed Josiah. He was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. So he died when he was 39. He reigned for 31 years. His mother's name was Yedida, daughter of Adiah of Bozkah. He did what was pleasing to the Eternal and followed all the ways of his ancestor David. He did not deviate to the right or to the left. Now, King David in the Bible is the paradigm of a good king. Even though he sinned, he was 100% faithful to God. He eliminated idolatry, and he only served God. That was King David. So Josiah, the king, stood by the pillar and he solemnized the covenant before the Eternal. Okay? This is everything Josiah does, that they would follow the Eternal and observe his commandments, his injunctions, and his laws with all their heart and soul. They would fulfill all the terms of this covenant and inscribe upon the scroll, and all the people entered into the covenant. The king ordered to the high priest Hilkiah, the priest of the second rank, and the guards of the threshold to bring out to the temple of the Eternal, and all the objects made for Baal and Asherah. Remember, these are the evil objects to the idols. Okay, and they took out all those idols. And all the hosts of heaven, and he burned them. All those idols to foreign gods, burned them outside Jerusalem in the fields of Kidron, and he removed the ashes to Bethel. Not our Bethel. We don't have any ashes at Bethel congregation, but that was that Bethel. He suppressed the idolatrous priests whom the kings of Judah had appointed to make offerings in the shrines in the towns of Judah and in the environs, and to those to make offerings to Baal, to the sun and the moon and the constellations, all the hosts. This guy's good. He is eradicating everything. He's not leaving one iota of idolatry left. He brought out the image of Asherah from the house of the Eternal to the Kidron Valley outside Jerusalem and burned that too. He beat it to dust and scattered its dust over the burial ground of the common people. The king commanded all the people, offer the Passover sacrifice to the Eternal your God as prescribed in this scroll. He's holding up the Torah. Now the Passover sacrifice had not been offered in that manner in the days of the chieftains who ruled Israel, or during the days of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah. Only in the 18th year of King Josiah was such a Passover sacrifice offered in the manner of the Eternal in Jerusalem. So ever since the kingdom split and they started worshiping idolatry, the most important Passover sacrifice, that critical, reminiscent of the very first sacrifice ever offered to God by the people of Israel, supposed to be kept meticulously every year, they abandoned it. Here he's instituting again. Thus he fulfilled the terms of the teaching, the Torah, recorded in that scroll, that the priest Hilkiah had found in the house of the Eternal. Now listen to this. There was no king like him before, who turned back to the Eternal with all his heart and soul and might, in full accord with the teaching of the Moses, nor did any like him arise after him. Okay, so right now we see Ammon was a very bad king and died young. We see Josiah was the best king Judah ever saw since the time of David. David was considered to be the absolute best king ever, and he lived a very old age. We even have a Haftorah portion that begins, and King David was old. We have a whole Haftorah, there's a whole section about him in his old age. So if the best king who ever lived since David was now king, certainly he lived to a ripe old age. So let's read about that now. Let's see what happens to King Josiah. Offers the Passover. Whoops. In his days, meaning, okay, so we just did, nor did any like him arise after him. Non sequitur just continues. In his day, Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, marched against the king of Assyria to the river Euphrates. King Josiah marched toward him, but when he confronted him at Megiddo, Pharaoh Necho slew him. His servants conveyed his body in chariot from Megiddo to Jerusalem. They buried him in his tomb. The greatest king ever since David was struck down by Pharaoh Necho without comment. And that's the end of the story. Nowhere is there comment of why. Nowhere is there there's nothing. That's it. That's the end of the story. They struck him down, killed him, they buried him, and they moved on. End of Josiah. It's very lacks any pomp and circumstance for the greatest king to have ever lived since King David, that he was struck down. So something isn't adding up here. Because in all the other stories of the kings, every king who's struck down, there's a reason why, and it says he was struck down. I'm not going to get into the rabbinic interpretations of that. I want to stick right now. We're going to just focus right on the biblical text right now. Because now that we've read that, suddenly in the Bible, there is something that's unclear. You have an example. Everything in the story, everything in the Torah says, if you're good, you are rewarded. If you're bad, you get punished. Badness happens because people are bad. When people do bad things, they're punished. We have all these examples of all these bad kings who do bad things and are punished, and all of a sudden the greatest king who ever lived is struck down early. He's 39 years old. He was still king, struck down in battle. No comment by the Bible. That would leave one to wonder and start to think, what's going on with this biblical omnipotence? God is all good, God is all powerful, and the greatest king who ever lived dies young. Okay, very bizarre. We just got finished saying in the story of Noah how a ripe old age is 120. Not really, that's about as long as you get. That's basically what it was saying in the story of Noah and the flood, that human beings should yeah. Yeah. So Jerry asks, has God withdrawn from the world? Well, not in the Bible. Not in the Bible, and not for the rest, not for the Talmudic rabbis. No, but God has not, that's a much later philosophical concept. But what we do get in the Bible is a very direct question. At some point in the Bible, the question is very directly asked, wait, what's going on here? The Bible says that God is all good. Everything God does is good. People are evil. When people are bad, they get punished. But our reality tells us sometimes good people get punished. Why? Where is the answer to Pharaoh Necho? So the Bible comes up with this answer, which you are likely familiar with. There's a whole book dedicated to it, the book of Job. There was a man in the land of Uz named Job. There is no land of Uz. May as well have been the land of Oz. The man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. His possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 she-asses, and a very large household. That man was wealthier than anyone in the East. It was the custom of his sons to hold feasts, each on his day set in his home. They would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. If the round of feast days was over, Job would send word to them to sanctify themselves, and rising or in the morning, he would make burnt offerings, one for each of them, for Job thought, perhaps my children have sinned and blasphemed against God. So we're seeing here, Job is really good. Job is perfect, and when Job is even atoning for his children just in case retroactively, a good father. Bailing them out of jail even before they get in jail. This is what Job always used to do. One day, the divine beings presented themselves before the eternal, and the adversary came along with them. Okay, the adversary. In Hebrew, the word is hasatan, literally the adversary. Hasatan, in the biblical sense, is the prosecuting attorney in God's court. Later, religions take Hasatan and make it this adversary's capital name, Satan, as the devil, the anti-God. But that is not the function of Hasatan in the Hebrew Bible. Hasatan in the Hebrew Bible is the prosecuting attorney. Works for God. Your enemy, if you're bad, okay, tries to trip you up. The adversary, the eternal asks the adversary, where have you been? The adversary said, I've been roaming over all the earth. The eternal said to the adversary, have you noticed my servant Job? There was no one like him on earth, a harmless and blameless upright man who fears God and shuns evil. The adversary answered the eternal, doesn't Job have a good reason to fear God? Why, it's you who have fenced him round, him and his household, and all that he has. You have blessed his efforts, so that his possessions spread out in the land. Of course he's going to be faithful to God. He's got everything. But lay your hand upon all that he has, and he will surely blaspheme you to your face. The eternal replied to the adversary, see that all has in your power, only do not lay a hand on him. The adversary can only do what God gives the adversary permission to do. Okay? The adversary departed from the presence on the eternal one day as his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the house of their eldest brother. A messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing, she-asses were grazing alongside with them when the Sabaeans attacked them and carried them off and put the boys to the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you. This one was still speaking when another came, etc., etc. Hold on one second. I just have to I have something I'm getting a message that I have to address real quick, so give me one second. Sorry to do that. All right. Sorry about that. Okay. So back. So we see what happens with Job is Job has everything. Okay. Yeah, no, Job is God is all powerful because according to this story, God is giving permission to Satan to do these things in order to test Job. Okay. So we from the story of Job, and we can go through all of this, all the story. You can read all of Job if you want to see what happens. We get to one of his friends who says the following, because Job ends up in misery but doesn't abandon God. We see Job suffers all these terrible things, but does not abandon God, but starts saying, what's happening to me? Why is all this terrible stuff happening to me? And what his friends basically see, and here's the epitome of one of his friends' comments. Eliphaz the Temanite said in reply, but now that it overtakes you, it is too much. It reaches you and you are unnerved. Is not your piety, your confidence, your integrity, your hope? Think now. What innocent man ever perished? Where have the upright been destroyed? As I have seen, those who plow evil and sow mischief reach them. They perish by a blast from God, all gone at the breath of his nostrils. His friend says, in other words, think hard about what you've done. You've deserved it. You obviously deserved it, which is why you're suffering. That's what the text is saying. And then you go through it. Many of these friends say this, think that, it's you, you've done something wrong. You obviously deserved it. Bad things don't happen to good people. But we, as the story readers, the narrator makes it clear that Job is perfect. This was all part of the adversary's test. And Job passes the test. The only thing Job does is say, God, what did you do to me? What is going on here? And then we get our biblical answer. Then the Eternal replied to Job out of the tempest and said, who is this? Who is this who darkens counsel, speaking without knowledge? Gird your loins like a man. I will ask you and you will inform me. Where were you when I did the earth's foundations? Speak if you have understanding. Do you know who fixed its dimensions or who measured it with a line? The Eternal said to reply Job, shall one who should be disciplined complain against Shaddai? He who arraigns God must respond. This becomes the traditional answer for why bad things happen to good people. Okay. I lost my Zoom field. Okay. Stop. Okay. This becomes the traditional answer. The answer is the world is too big for us to understand. We didn't create the world. In other words, that last sentence saying, you think you can do better, go do better. That's what God is saying. You want to create a better world? You weren't here when I created the world, when I made its dimensions, when I set the whole thing up. You do it. Go ahead. You don't like the way I do it? You do it. You do it better. In other words, Job, the book of Job's answer to the question Job asked is, we just don't know. By the time you get to go, we do start to have well, God seems to be all powerful. and God seems to be all good. But here something's going on that's not all powerful and not all good. We're not sure what it is. And the answer is you don't understand. I think the hint is saying, if the hint here, the traditional answer is God is all good and all powerful, and there's some things we just don't understand. That is the answer you will get from anyone traditionally religious. It's what the answer you'll get from an Orthodox rabbi. It's the answer you would get from the Talmudic rabbis. Okay. God is all good, all powerful. We don't know everything. But I think here in Job, I think it's saying, by God saying, do you think you could do better? Were you here when I made the world? I think it's saying the world that's being created is the best world that can be created. It's just not perfect. God may be the most powerful entity in all of existence, but that does not necessarily mean God is 100% all powerful. I think that's the hint, which leaves us from the biblical questions. The Bible leaves us with these answers, but still does not come up with, it still leaves the question, though, of how to answer the question of theodicy, because if God is all good and all powerful, then we have a problem, because good things do happen to bad people. I mean, bad things do happen. Well, good things happen to bad people, but more importantly, bad things do happen to good people. Okay, we know that. So the traditional answer is we just don't understand. But the biblical answer doesn't seem to be we don't understand. It emphasizes what's repeated throughout the Bible is God is all good. But there do seem to be instances where God is not all powerful. God gets angry with the people and Mount Sinai. And God says, I'm going to destroy the people. And Moses pleads God down, says, God, hold on a minute. Not so fast. God says to Moses, I'm going to blot out the whole people and make of you a new nation. And Moses said, no. Moses, the one who's blameless, says, no. If you take the people down, take me with them. I'll go down with the people. And then the nations of the world will say, you created this people just to destroy them. No, you have to forgive the people. Punish the sinners themselves, but all the other people who let it happen, let them go. And that's end up what's happening. That happens. That does not seem to be an all-powerful and all-knowing God if Moses has to reason with God. Now, again, the apologetic for the way we look at the Torah is saying that, well, all of this was rhetorical. God knew what was going to happen. God knew it. God planned it. And when God said to the people, when God said to Moses, I'm gonna destroy the people, that was a test of Moses. But when we hear about God's anger, it doesn't say that. It never describes God's anger as rhetorical. God is angry. And sometimes Moses has to calm God down. What kind of all-powerful being can be calmed down by a human being? I think the clues in the Bible are that God is not all-powerful. What does Kabbalah have to say about this? Well, Kabbalah has this concept that the world was created and these vessels were created mystically, and the vessels broke. Usually the connection is that when human beings sinned for the first time, Adam and Eve disobeyed God, the vessels broke. And ever since that time, human beings have the obligation to fix those vessels. So the Kabbalistic answer is not, why do bad things happen to good people? The question is, how do we become God's partner in improving the world? So for Kabbalah, the question of theodicy becomes a non-important question. We don't need to ask these questions according to Kabbalah. The question of theodicy is irrelevant because whether we can answer, is God all powerful and is God all good? And what, like, that's the wrong question. The right question is, how do we respond to problems in the world and how can we become God's partner in fixing those things? That's the Kabbalistic answer ultimately. It avoids the question. It says we're not going to ask the question. The first person, okay, isn't suffering inherent in an ordered world where living beings are limited in power and knowledge? Okay. Well, again, then if it's inevitable, could God have prevented it? Could God have prevented suffering? If a baby is born with cancer, could God have done something to prevent that? If God is all powerful, then yes, God could have done something. If God is all powerful, then God could have done something. And if God just simply changed one cell so that it didn't become cancerous, that seems relatively easy compared to the creation of the entire world. If God could have fixed that one cell and doesn't, now we've got the person who all they had to do was pick up the cell phone and dial 911 and they don't. If you could pick up the cell phone and dial 911, very easy for you to do, and you don't because you don't feel like it, we would say that's not good. We would put that in a category of that's an immoral act. Because you actively make the choice, I don't feel like it. I have more important things to do. And you could have saved someone's life and you don't because you refuse to call 911 and take 30 seconds out of your day to report it. Well, if that's easy for you, how easy would it be for God to fix the one errant cell in that baby before it becomes cancerous to prevent that baby? And if God doesn't, and could you believe in that God? Could you believe in a God that is all good, that is, let's say, all powerful, but chooses not to do something that God could and save the suffering of a baby? Tay-Sachs disease. Child is born and suffers the rest of the child's life until the child dies. The first person to ask this question in the modern Jewish world was Harold Kushner. And he asked the question because he saw his child born with that disease that's degenerative and you die of old age by age 13. So the older you get, the worse your life becomes. The best your life is when you're born, and from there it's only downhill until you die at around age 13. And Harold Kushner said, I don't know, I still believe in God. I don't think God allowed this. Because if God could have stopped it and didn't, then God is not all good, and I can't accept that. That's what Harold Kushner's answer was. He said, instead, if you read his book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, which already at this point is over 40 years old, he said that God is there for us and helps us work through our troubles and supports us in times of difficulty. God is the most powerful being that exists, but that doesn't mean God is absolutely 100% all powerful. Where was God? He wrote an essay, Where was God during 9/11? And his essay was God was busy that day. God was holding up those towers as long as God could to allow as many people as possible to escape. So that instead of there being 50,000 deaths, there were only 3,000. But that was the best God could do at that moment. That was his answer. That's an answer that says God is all good, but God is supremely powerful, but not the most powerful, not all powerful. As Harold Kushner was lecturing about his book, which became widely popular around the country, um, Christian theologians saying, oh, what you're describing is what's called process theology. And he's like, what? Never heard of that. So process theology was developed by liberal Christian thinkers, Protestant thinkers in the early 20th century. And so in Protestantism, they've known about this process theology for a long time. Harold Kushner never heard of process theology, but was told this is process theology, and he didn't know what it is. And so eventually, Rabbi Brad Artson, who is the dean of the rabbinical school at the Conservative Movement's Los Angeles School, the University of Judaism, um, he took up that theory of process theology, and he's written on it. So his name is Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson, and you can look him up, and I will put his name in the chat. Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson. If you look him up if you look him up, you can find books that he's written. So if you really want to get into how, this question of theodicy that could make sense for those of us continuing to grapple with it, I would refer to you to Rabbi Harold Kushner's book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, which many of you have probably already heard of. And I would refer to you to Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson, who then started. So Rabbi Kushner's book was written from personal experience, from the death of his child. Rabbi Artson's book was written. He got into the philosophy behind process theology. There are also other works that I could refer to you in the non-Jewish world, by authors of process theology in the Protestant world. And if you would like any of those, just if you don't have my email address, just reach out to Rabbi Streifer and he can forward those messages to me. I'll also put my email address in the chat in case you want to, if you Beth L. Don't worry about the capitalization. Email doesn't care about caps. My computer just did that. So you can email directly, or you can email Rabbi Streifer, and I can give you references to some of these books for further exploration. Doesn't Rabbi Artson? I'm not sure. Actually, I've never discussed that. I actually know Rabbi Artson. I knew him before he became a rabbi. I knew him in his journey through rabbinical school, and I've known him for years. But I never actually discussed that with him. I think he might have a child. Another thing, I think he may have someone who's neurodivergent, if I remember correctly, but I'm not sure exactly what that was. I think so, yeah. But his book became much more from the philosophical stand, whereas Rabbi Kushner's was written philosophically based on his personal experience. Now, it's 3:55. I actually usually do this class in like an hour and a half and then take questions, but I kind of shortened it, and I can stay on for a little while longer if that's good with Rabbi Streifer. If you can, and I can take some questions if we want to do some questions and answers or discussion.
I can stay about 5 minutes longer, but I can also hand it over to you and you can
Oh,
stay longer
right.
than that if you'd like
Okay.
to.
Yeah, and then so when I end the meeting, then yeah, you can make me the host, and then when I end the meeting, everything will still be saved to your account, right?
Exactly. That's right.
Okay, fine, fine. Okay, so yeah, why don't you make me host? Or I think since I'm co-host, maybe just when you need to go, you can just leave and I'll end the meeting when we're done. Yeah, okay, that's right. Okay, Ellen tells us that Rabbi Artson has a child with autism. Yeah, I do kind of remember that. So those of you, this is my presentation. So those of you who need to leave, you can always leave at any time anyway. But My official presentation is over, but those of you who would like to stay on for a little while for questions, answers, I can stay on probably about 20, 25 minutes or so. So, Amalia, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. It's a lot of food for thought. My problem is of collective punishment, and that happens in the Bible. Okay, some people sinned, but it doesn't mean that every single person sinned, and yet God sometimes punishes the whole people of Israel. It's sometimes written in the Bible in plural.
Yes.
So
yes.
that's my problem with
Yeah.
God.
So yeah, no, I agree. And I think that um, the rabbis tend to justify God by saying in those cases the entire people were sinning. And people who were not sinning were not punished collectively. Um, that's usually the rabbinic justification for that. I kind of look at the Bible almost though in a different setting. I kind of see the Bible as really trying to address the question ultimately, I think the main purpose of the Torah is to answer the question of the Jews who were in Babylonian exile, why are we in exile? And so instead of being a formal declaration of this is how God acts, the Bible as a whole then becomes the context, how did we end up here? What did we do wrong? If we are God's people, why are we in exile? And that ultimately becomes the purpose of the Bible is to answer that question. So that goes on a whole different train of thought. Um, but I don't think I don't really believe that I don't believe in God doing a collective punishment. I don't believe that. I personally don't. Um, okay. Yeah, so yeah, I think Rabbi Streifer was just asked if you'll send up, but I think you're going to send that to all the people who registered, right? Yeah, if you registered for the class, well, you did register because you wouldn't have the link if you didn't, then you will get a copy of this recording. Um, okay, there, good. All right. Okay, Jerry, your hand is up.
So, um, for me, God exists for sure, but God does not act at the level of individual human beings in their day-to-day life. So it's not a question of whether God is good or bad, or whether God allows good or bad things or causes good or bad things. God just doesn't interact with people in their day-to-day lives. So it's really a moot question.
Okay. Well, that is certainly one way to tell in terms of the question of theodicy. The question of theodicy asks, if God is all good and God is all powerful, then why do bad things happen? So your answer is still one of those two. It's either God is not all powerful because God doesn't have the ability to intervene when people suffer, or God is not all good because God can't be bothered. What it's still by saying if we're that if God is both all good and all powerful, then God wouldn't just step back. Either God had to step back or God wants to step back. And in either case, it still asks the question, either God had to step back because God is not all powerful, or God wants to step back because God is not all good. Because if God could be all good and all powerful, then God wouldn't step back when good people suffer.
Okay, I think I
Yes,
see where
Kenneth.
you're going.
Yeah, yeah. Kenneth and then Herb.
I, I tend to take the position that God went to an awful lot of trouble to design, develop, and implement creation. And in my understanding, it's pretty rare for God to extend his hand and actually interfere with what happens in the normal development of his creation as it happens. As an example, if God answered every prayer, nobody would ever die. So we know that he's not answering every prayer. I think there's a lot for us to learn during our life here on earth, in the flesh. I think there's a lot to learn. I think love is one of them, particularly for mankind, but there's a lot for us to learn. And a lot of times there are bad things that happen to us, that there's a learning experience that always comes away from those experiences. And I think they're very important for us. So I think it's all by design. I
Yeah.
really do.
So that is one of the that's Job's answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's actually that is Job's answer. Okay, Herb.
Yeah, I wrote something before. Has to do with free will, which I don't think you mentioned. Um, as part of God Himself giving us free will. How do we define that? How could you have free will when God's all powerful? So the words powerful and good are really open to interpretation when we say those words. There's a rabbi that wrote a book which was controversial about the Holocaust, and he's trying to justify it because he cannot come to a conclusion that God is anything but good. On the other hand, he saw what happened. So he's like fitting in, someone must be bad. So it must be bad, so God is good, and God good got rid of the bad. And a lot of this is simplified in order to fit our definitions of what good is, what powerful is. And we tend to redefine these terms to fit our definition. But we have personal feelings of how we feel about God, according to our religious beliefs and other things like that. And a lot of it is not reconcilable when you want to use those two words, good, powerful, free will. A lot of those, you can't reconcile it unless you use some terminology that you might not agree with because you're saying, oh boy, he's all good. And how do we say he's maybe a little good and maybe a little bad and maybe a little powerful? And you try to fit things in. So it's very difficult. And that comes up mainly with explaining the Holocaust. It seems that was the big subject of how we do that when we saw children and elderly, everyone being killed and burnt. And it's just, how do you explain God? And a lot of people became irreligious due to that. But people I know who went through the Auschwitz, who came out right now are religious, very orthodox. And I don't know if I could be like that. It's up to the person. It's just like, how do you do that?
Right.
So a lot of it is
Absolutely.
you're in a quandary. Okay.
Right. Well, that's what the Odyssey is. The Odyssey is the question of why are we in this quandary? That's exactly what the Odyssey is.
Yeah.
Okay. John, your hand is up.
Yes. So the thing I struggle with is the concept of good and bad. These seems to be human concepts that we've constructed ourselves to try to understand the world around us. So instead of asking the question, why do bad things happen to good people? I think the question should be, why do bad things happen? Without any good or bad or judgment associated with that. So the virus that attacks my body is also a creation of God. So is that good or bad? I just think we're trying to find reasons for why something happened that may not exist, period.
Well, the whole endeavor of religion is a human construct.
Right.
I mean, just to say that, the questions of good and bad or powerful or all powerful are human, those are human conventions for sure. So, it's just you just have to decide, that it's just the question that people frequently ask, especially if they've been suffering. What did I do to deserve this? What did they do to deserve it? And when people ask that question, you want an answer. Now, one answer is there's no such thing as God. That's a simple answer for many people. And for many people after the Holocaust, that became the only possible answer. That was my father's answer. He lost his father in the Holocaust, and he never recovered from that trauma. Barely escaped with his mother at age 9. Okay, he said there can't be a God. If there had been a God in the world, this wouldn't have happened. So that was his answer. And I'll get to you in a minute, Steve. But keep in mind that this was not the first tragedy to befall either the Jewish people or humanity. We've been suffering, 100,000 Jews were killed in the Ukrainian revolt in 1648. Millions of Jews were killed in the Roman revolt. It's not the first time. We've experienced massacres and other human beings have also. So the Holocaust, for us, is the most extreme version of how human evil can be taken to its logical extreme. The industrialization of murder is the absolute extreme of what human evil without control is. But, could God have stopped it? Well, the answer is yes or no. The answer is either yes or no, or there is no God. Or if we say, but God doesn't act in the way that we thought God did, that is it's still a question of theodicy. Theodicy ultimately only has 3 possible answers, and I think the third answer is a cop-out. When you study, when you take if you look at the methodology of theodicy, theodicy always tries to answer the questions: is God all good? If God is all good and God is all powerful, why do bad things happen? The answer is either God is not all good, God is not all powerful, or we don't understand. Ultimately, any other explanation is one of those 3 subsets. And I believe that the answer we don't understand is ultimately God is not all powerful, because none of us could accept a God is not all good. We would not be able to emulate a God and use a God that is not all good as our model for behavior. Because what would be the point? What would be the point of emulating a capricious God? That would allow evil people to do things and say this is godlike. All right. Steve, yeah, go ahead. And Steve, go ahead, but you have to unmute.
Thank you. And for those that are watching what I'm looking up, I got a 2 computer system here. So I look up, so I'm not ignoring you. Is it then, we talked about the Holocaust and sickness, doesn't that provide, yes, people suffer and suffer horribly, but doesn't it provide an opportunity for humanity as a whole and individuals in humanity to respond, to find solutions, to prevent this type of evil? Or if it's a disease like dementia, this is like what I'm going through, I stand the watch now with my wife, to then people to interact, to be inspired, to be better, to find cures, find solutions to things.
So that was the Kabbalistic answer that I referred to. Kabbalah says the question is irrelevant. There's no point in even asking the question, is God all good or God all powerful? It's irrelevant. The question we need to be asking is, what can I do to make the world better? What can we learn from the bad things that happen in the world? Not ask the question, why does God do this? But ask the question, if this is happening, what can I do to be God's partner in making the world better? That
So
is the
it's,
Kabbalistic answer.
so it's the partnership that
Yeah.
we're learning.
Yeah,
Maybe
exactly.
then that God, as we know God, is evolving also in this relationship. It is a partnership.
That's where we get to process theology. That's what process theology means. That whether the relationship between humanity and God is constantly evolving. Whether God is evolving or not is beyond our understanding, but the relationship between humanity and God is in process. It's a process. It's not a clear, stagnant definition. That's where you get the idea of process theology. But yeah, so ultimately the question of why do bad things happen to good people, there are two sources. If you have experienced yourself, then that becomes a very motivating question for you. Why is this happening to me or my loved one? What did we do? If it's happening to someone else, the Kabbalistic answer is, what can I do to help make it better? Any other questions? All right. If you do have more questions, feel free to pop me an email. A lot of my members are still logged in, though you all have my email. Those of you who are not my members, feel free to either pull the email down from the chat or go ahead and ask Rabbi Streifer for my email address. And I've told him he can share that. All right. Thank you all for participating.
Thank you.
I enjoyed having you. Good questions. Good thought.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Excellent presentation. Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you.